Hi, my name is Katrine Barber and today I'd like to talk to you about the development of British studio ceramics. It's going to be a whistle-stop tour through 100 years, so hold on to your seats, here we go. This very quick introduction to the development of studio pottery in the West starts with Fernand Leger, known to some as the father of British pottery. This year sees potters throughout the world celebrating the centenary of the Leach Pottery in St Ives. This was a moment that has had profound influence on the establishment of the studio pottery movement and still holds sway 100 years later. Fernand Leger, born in 1887, spent his early life in Japan and China, where he was influenced by the ideas and philosophy of the East. He returned to England at the beginning of the 20th century and attended the Slade School of Fine Art and the London School of Art, where he trained as an etcher. Ceramics in education at that time was practically non-existent. The world of ceramics was dominated by large manufacturing factories situated in 6 towns that made up the city of Stoke-on-Trent. Small ceramic studios, as we now know them today, simply did not exist. There were no books and technical information was difficult to access. Contrast that with today. A quick Google search using the term pottery brings up 43 million items. In 1909, Leach returned to Japan, and it was here that he first encountered the world of ceramics. In 1911, he attended a Raku pottery party, where he was enthralled by the firing process, and he wrote, "By this, to me a miracle, I was carried away to a new world. Enthralled, I was on the spot, seized with the desire to take up the craft." This was a pivotal time in Leach's life, and he decided to follow the path of ceramics. Then, in 1920, after spending time in Japan and Korea to study his craft, Leach set sail for England, where he set up the Leach Pottery in St Ives, continuing to experiment with many forms and techniques. He exhibited, wrote and taught, raising the profile of studio ceramics. In 1932, he moved to Dartington Hall to set up a pottery and to teach, and it was here he started work on his book, A Potter's Book, described by many as the Potter's Bible, which was published in 1940. His belief that the meeting of ideas and philosophies of the East, China, Japan and Korea, along with the West, was at the centre of the development of studio pottery. This takes up a large part of his book, along with his firm ideas on how things should be done technically. It's a self-confident and imperious book, and much about how a potter should live his life and work as a potter, as to how he should be making his pots. Throughout, he's telling his reader that they should be looking to the East, that there's a common standard of fitness and beauty, and that standard is missing in the West. He promotes the idea of truth to materials, championing the idea that pots should be functional, used, everyday part of life. There continues to be a divide in the world of clay between those who produce work that is often strictly functional, often with an emphasis on glaze, and those who break the rules. The ceramic artists whose work I admire mostly are generally those who emphasize the quality of clay, the shapes and effects the clay produces in their hands. Most of the ceramic artists I admire don't use glazes, and in my opinion, it makes the shape and form of their work more interesting. Their shapes are pared down to their essence. Nothing comes between them, no layer of glass. Colours can be chosen to complement shapes and forms. In my opinion, there's a freedom in their work that the rigid world of Fernand Leger and his followers can never aspire to. The real break with tradition came in the 1950s. In London, Lucie Rie, Hans Koper and other émigrés who settled in England after escaping the Nazi regime in fascist Germany brought awareness of European modernism to their work. Picasso was producing painted ceramics, and visual artists such as Leger, Mira and Chagall were working with clay throughout the 1950s. Studio ceramics were breaking away from the influence of Mr. Leach. Skip to the 1960s, when a new generation of potters began to experiment with abstractation and various glaze and surface effects. Ceramic artists were increasingly turning away from throwing on the wheel towards hand building, which up to now had been thought of as amateurish, and they were discovering they had more artistic freedom using these methods. In the 1970s, David Queensbury was running the ceramics department at the Royal College of Art, and he encourages students to marry traditional craft and technology with industrial processes. Ceramic artists such as Jennifer Lee and Nicholas Rena were among the graduates from the Royal College of Art who have gone on to influence ceramics today. Experiments in new clay, new methods of working and unglaze techniques have removed barriers placed there by the earlier studio potters movement under the leadership of Bernard Leach. Mr. Leach would have been horrified at the thought of finishing any pot with anything other than glazes, but there's been a move away from them by a growing number of potters. As an alternative to glazes, cold finishers, technique that developed before glaze technology evolved. Burnishing the clay was often used to produce a shiny surface and seal the porous surface. Vessels could be carbonised to produce variations of colour. Many traditional societies still produce unglazed ceramics, but new technology has enabled the modern artists to explore a myriad of ways to decorate their wares without glazes. Makers such as Nicholas Rena, Jane Perryman and Eva Hild are just 3 artists who are not restricted by convention. Nicholas Rena trained as an architect, and this is reflected in the scale and form of his large works. Warm, energetic colours proliferate, and these are achieved either by inks or house paint, which are then polished and waxed. His early work was coloured with inks, which was a pure process that emerged purely accidentally. He'd been experimenting with car oil to seal the bisquified vessels he was working on when an accidental spillage of blue-black fountain ink provided him with a solution. In the early 2000s, he started to use flat house paint for some interiors to calm the piece down, which is often overloaded with nuisance and detail. Another artist I admire is Jane Perryman. In her book about ceramics without glazes, entitled Naked Clay, Jane Perryman says she wanted to simplify her approach to form and firing. She says she's always struggled with the alchemy of firing and saw in smoke firing a way to achieve the results she was looking for. She says, "I like the tactile element that invites handling, which is something I like and use in my work." In her book, she quotes Pierre Bayle, "Minerals leave me cold. For that reason, I never make glazes. Glass cuts, it has a rigidity. It lacks life." Another artist I admire is Eva Hild, who uses silica paint to cover her monumental sculptures, which she hand-builds from white clay, slowly building up the structure, which are then sanded and smoothed. The surface continually flows across thin white clay walls, internal and external shapes which change depending on the viewer's viewpoint. Her work is very much about form, about the space the work occupies. Complicated surface decoration would detract from this. A flat, matte colour allows the light to play across the surface, the shadows created as important as the sculpture itself. She says about hand building, "It grows slowly. I have time to reflect. I can change direction, make connections." This is how I feel when I'm hand building my vessels. Often I'm not really sure where the vessel is going, but taking my time to build, coil by coil, constantly smoothing and shaping, looking at the clay, seeing what the clay wants to be, I produce something that just fits. I allow the clay to lead me. There is a quote from Rena's which really resonates with me. "I like the way the house paint I use on my vessels can calm them down. There's no competition between the form and its surface. It has a unity and a feeling of calm." My work is all hand-built and it relies on the form of the vessels to make its impact. I've experimented with a variety of finishes but always come back to the flat colour or smoke firing that I now use in my work. I want my pots to be touched, stroked and held without a layer of glass between the clay and the holder. Bernard Leach continued to produce work until 1972 and write and travel and lecture up to his death in 1979. He paved the way forward for studio potters and was a major influence in the setting up of numerous ceramic studios throughout the world. But his world was a narrow one which left little room for growth and experimentation. Ceramic artists of today, 100 years later, look less towards the East and our own past for inspiration and more towards their own lives and cultures. Experimentation is encouraged in the main, although there are still hardline pockets of potters for whom the craft is all about glazing and wood firing. There is a place for this, there are markets for their work, but I consider myself to be fortunate to be creating work today in an atmosphere which is much more open to alternative methods. Today, clay is a tool in the hands of a myriad of makers who are free to explore the material in the way each of them chooses. Education in ceramics encourages this exploration, this testing of materials that we ceramicists use every day. Things have changed since Leach published his Potter's Book in 1940, cornering the market in pottery literature. As I said earlier, Leach believed that pots should be used every day, part of life. I agree that if you're producing functional ware, there is nothing better than drinking one's morning cup from a well-designed handmade mug, but that belief that function is what pottery is all about no longer applies. Functional and non-functional wares both have their place, and the world of ceramics is better for it. 100 years later, studio ceramics have become mainstream. YouTube has thousands of videos online, so we can see how something is made. First encountered clay when he attended a pottery evening class with his father when he was 6 years old. British studio ceramics have become collector's pieces, with post-war items by such as Lucie Rie, Hans Cooper and Emmanuel Cooper dominating the market. Studio ceramics have entered the mainstream and are as valued as much as sculpture and paintings. I do hope you've enjoyed this little taste of past 100 years of ceramic art. As I said earlier, there are literally millions of articles about ceramics on Google, and I hope this has inspired you to seek out further information. I'd like to say a big thank you to Doncaster Council for organising this through the Fighting Back Fund, and also to Chinwe Russell, who organises Doncaster Art Fair, who's pulled the whole thing together. Doncaster is a fantastic place to be involved in the arts at the moment. There's lots of things going on. Doncaster Art Fair, The Fringe, Point, Cast, Doncaster Art Club. Get yourself involved, it's worth it. Nice to talk to you. Thanks. Bye.